Good evening, Culver City, and welcome to community, our neighbors, our friends, our families. I hope you are having a good weekend. Um, Today is January 21st, 2024, and we wanted to bring a couple of community members together to discuss the one-year anniversary of Culver City's homelessness emergency and anti-camping ordinance. This live stream is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. My name is Nancy Barba. I am a resident in Culver City. I am a mom. My family has lived in Culver City for the last decade or so. I'm actually also a founding organizer with Culver City for More Homes. And issues of housing and our unhoused neighbors are very dear and important to me. Today, we want to share some information with the community that gives some history and context for what has transpired over the last year since Culver City passed its proclamation of a local emergency on homelessness back in January 2023, and then the subsequent activities and actions, including the anti-camping ordinance that Culver City passed with a very small margin of 3-2, that really made this quote unquote camping in Culver City illegal. So today we have some amazing speakers. We have Mayor Yasmine Imani McMorrin, Councilmember Freddy Puza, founding organizer with Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid, Ndindi, and Sebastien Hernandez, who's a volunteer with Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid, also known as PUMA. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our discussion. I will ask, would someone like to share with us kind of what was in that initial ordinance, the anti-camping ordinance, and what events led to that ordinance for the city?
I'm happy to kick us off. Hey, everyone. I hope y'all are safe and well. Yasmine Imani McMorrin, she, her. I have the privilege of being mayor of Culver City for this mayoral term. So really happy to be here for this occasion where we're sort of marking the anniversary of this ordinance that I was not in favor of and I remain opposed to. Just for the record, I do believe that homelessness is a housing issue. There's a lot of data around that. And I really believe that we could be addressing this this issue from really a meaningful care-centered approach, not just saying care, but really respecting and honoring the agency of our neighbors, really supporting folks with housing and wraparound services and really centering their needs. So not just utilizing certain words, but really operating and moving, respecting the agency of all human beings, and moving forward with that posture. But in terms of how we got here, in 2022, there was a special meeting. I remember I was unfortunately unable to attend in December 2022 because I had already gone out of town to be with my family for the holidays. And so there was this meeting. It sort of went along with Mayor Karen Bass's state of emergency in Los Angeles. The pointed difference with the LA ordinance is that it allowed for more sort of remove the red tape around building materials and permitting, et cetera, that was kind of getting in the way of creating housing in Los Angeles. So that is something we could have done in Culver City, and we did not. But so our ordinance really centered, and there were several meetings around it, the bulk of them, and there were a lot of actions, and community came around to really oppose this in January. And there was also, I believe, a march in December around this as well. Anyway, and basically our ordinance removes all structures that are not a blanket, a pillow, ID, and medication from neighbors. And right now the Supreme Court is going to weigh out if that's permissible. I mean, we're in a really sad state of affairs. A lot could be better about how we treat neighbors. Anyway, so that's what our ordinance does. We have more enforcement, more contacts with law enforcement. Just as a policy, the city doesn't have any employee that to go out to do engagement with our unhoused neighbors who without law enforcement present, so that there's going to be, or there are, increased contacts with law enforcement and our unhoused neighbors. And I'm just really disappointed. There has been a decrease, and I want to make sure that Councilmember Puza has an opportunity to chime in. But this was presented as a an emergency, or really a priority area for the city. As I've entered this mayoral term, staff is drawing back on reporting. We used to have a report every city council meeting with a 3-2 vote. That will move to every 60 days or as needed. And the council committee on housing and homelessness was dissolved in the January meeting. So on one hand, we are saying that this is a state of emergency a year ago. And although we're really excited by Project Home Key and the safe camping or safe sleeping site and the motel leasing and these things that we've been able to support, there's a lot more to be done, and now is not the time to draw back or not keep a close eye on our progress and our movement forward. So I want to make sure that Councilmember Puza gets to talk about some of the other responses that the city has made, just so that our community has more education about what has happened from 2023 or 2022 to now in 2024. Thanks so much, Nancy.
Of course. Thank you, Mayor McMorrin. And I would love to hear from Councilmember Puza. What has the city done? So Mayor McMorrin correctly stated, the intent was that, and the promise was that this anti-camping ordinance wouldn't be enforced until all of these other services and housing was available, including Project Home Key and safe camping. Tell us what actually has become operational over the last year.
Yeah, it's a great question. And thanks for really setting that groundwork, Mayor McMorrin. In order for the anti-camping ordinance to go into effect, 3 things had to happen. The Home Key had to be launched, the safe camping site had to be launched, and then our motel leasing program had to be launched. All those things have essentially begun. They're way behind, and understandably, some things, I understand that things take long, take a while. Construction gets delayed for a variety of reasons, but these things have started, during the last iteration of the council. So Home Key has started. There are about 73 available beds, and half of those are permanent supportive housing. The other are temporary supportive housing. The safe camping site can hold up to 40 people if they double up in the beds, and then the motel leasing program. So that's where you lease 2 motels. One is for a 1-year lease, the other is for a 2-year lease. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think we've been using those. And the one positive aspect of that is we can use those because there is a concern when there's extreme weather. It's really cold right now, especially for Southern Californians. I know people in different parts of the country may not agree with that, but for us in Southern California, it's really cold. It does get down to 30 degrees, which if you're out on the, with not a lot of, in the open air, that is very, it does affect you deeply. So I think a lot of the thing that I grapple with that's really challenging is we really put the cart before the horse with this. We should be focusing on our services first. We're dealing with the criminalization, the punishment. We should be focusing on, what's the next step? So we got all these services, but what's phase 2? What's phase 3? How are we getting housing? How are we getting affordable housing? The other thing that's really critical is we have our mobile crisis intervention unit that will officially launch next month. That's another program that took a long time to get off the ground for various reasons that we're not quite sure why it took so long for it to get, to launch. This will be critical. The police are just not trained to deal with homeless, the unhoused population. So these are going to be trained professionals. It'll be an unarmed response. And I'm very excited for this program and for the leadership of the prior council majority that really, spearheaded this program.
Thank you, Councilmember Puza. And I'd love to hear from Ndindi and Sebastien about how the essentially some of the sweeps, how it has impacted and affected the unhoused community. I think it's really important to note that the anti-camping ordinance was not to be put, start getting enforced, but we started seeing sweep notices fairly early in 2023. And we know that not all of those Project Home Key opportunities for housing have been made available to people. So Ndindi and Sebastien would love to hear from you how a mutual aid organization such as PUMA, what you're seeing out and how you're supporting.
Maybe I'll just hop in. Thank you, everyone. This is a very important issue for us because we actually really do exist because we think housing is a human right and everyone should just have it no matter what. And so when Culver City rolled out this anti-camping ban, what might not be clear to people who are not close to this issue is that services are not very accessible and that there are no real housing options for folks. So even as we talk about Project Home Key, those 70 plus spots, there are so many people who are scrambling and begging to be on lists for them. There are people who have practically most of the people who we see have some kind of case management or housing navigation or something. And there's this kind of a myth that people are service resistant, that they are just refusing things. But we're just here to tell you that those things either don't exist or they're very difficult to come by or they're very, very difficult to access. So pretty much people are service experienced. They've been ping-ponged back and forth across service providers, across the city, across agencies, nonprofits. If I tried to explain it, it would look like a conspiratorial map. That is just the general experience of someone who lives unsheltered outdoors in our city. And so the anti-camping ban, I'm so glad that the two electeds mentioned this, really couldn't and can't address any of those issues that have to do with access and actually getting people into housing. But what sweeps do, and there's tons of evidence, ourselves have written and published a lot of scholarly articles on this. They're extremely disruptive to people's lives. They're a huge setback. People lose their IDs, their medication, their blankets, all of these things that the anti-camping ban is actually supposed to protect you, right? You're supposed to be protected from those being gone or missing. And that usually is not the case. Also, when people are swept, there's no magical place to go to. So as the city has made almost every public possible space unavailable, it means that people are now hiding and living in more dangerous, more hidden, more violent places than when they were visible, so that folks like ourselves can see them. We do outreach a couple times a week, and it's usually harm reduction, it's food, it's also trying to support people as they navigate. And quite frankly, it's just maintaining relationships, because being unhoused is a very stigmatizing and lonely experience that I don't think house people sometimes recognize. So if you live somewhere and a sign like this is posted up above your head while you're asleep, and you wake up in the morning and you got to do something about every single thing that you own in a tent has to be moved, and you have to play this game week after week, it's quite defeating. It brings no one closer to being housed. People have really engagements with law enforcement that they shouldn't, and interactions they shouldn't be having. And part of also being unhoused is it means you've likely been criminalized over and over again. So we're talking about folks with warrants, also folks who are quite frankly choosing to be where they are so they can avoid violence or an abuser or something somewhere else. So these are all of the different factors that an anti-camping ban really can't resolve at all. And so it's been quite a year of chaos, quite frankly. And Culver City has a real opportunity as a very small city, and one that, as I've understood, I've worked, taught, or lived around Culver City for 20 plus years, having a progressive thrust and creative ideas around climate and housing. And I think there are a lot of creative and exciting ideas and people who have these ideas. And I'm really hoping that the progressive forces prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ndindi. And I want to hear, first I want to share that there has been reports and studies done that as a result of sweeps, and we have data, plenty of data that shows this, that as a result of sweeps in Los Angeles, not in 2023, but earlier, more people actually, when they are tracked, more people died than were housed. So it's important to note that sweeps are extremely dangerous to already vulnerable populations. Sebastien, I'd love to hear from you. I know that you've been there as witnessing and support to several of those sweeps. Tell me what you see. Tell me, do you see those people that you've started to know by name? Do you see them come back? And where do they end up?
Well, thank you, Nancy. Let me get to that. But I did want to start with looking at Culver City's housing program. Basically, it was never designed to house as many people that had been counted in the homelessness count for the years prior, where we have some 80 spaces available. That does not come anywhere near to the 200 to 300 people that have been counted in the census. And if anyone here has more specific information on that, I'd like to hear it. But so the design was never to really house everyone. It was to house enough people, it felt like, to shut some folks up and to be able to oblige other forces in the city that would prefer to prioritize aesthetics over people, prioritize trash and cleanup over the well-being of the people that are out there living on the street. And so I think any conversation that includes a camping ban, I think Freddy Puza alluded to this prior, that discussions about a camping ban aren't designed to obviously help anyone. It's about pleasing the people who don't like to see trash on the streets. If you don't want to see trash on the streets, you have to address the people who are out there living on the streets and what other physical and mental, emotional problems that they might need. So, or support that they might need to solve those issues. So I think what we have is a large systemic issue that is just being papered over. And I think, having the sweeps like the one that happened on under the 405 freeway on Venice Boulevard. Yes, this picture, I believe this picture is showing the LA side, if I'm not mistaken. So what we had happen there was actually Culver City abdicate any responsibility to housing the people that was on the Culver City side. No one from that sweep ended up in any sort of Culver City housing. All Culver City did was provide police, and they provided snacks for the police and a nice way station for the police to go to the bathroom. Culver City did not provide anything like that at all for the people who were being moved around, who were being swept. And so what we found is that a lot of the people went into the LA program inside safe and were put into placed into motels. there's a lot of questions, and there's a lot of or what we call carceral rules around those motels, and limiting visitors, limiting a lot of access to relationships that people had prior, and they've really started to crack down those different motels. There's also several people who had their tents taken, who agreed to like give up their shelter for the promise of housing, but ended up not receiving housing. So whenever this promise of housing happens, a lot of times it falls through. And in one case, it fell through at a motel, where the motel manager said that they didn't have the insurance to accommodate a pregnant woman. And so there is another case from that same sweep where someone was with her husband in the hospital that morning, and arrived to find that her tent had been taken, and she was put on a waiting list and then given the runaround for days until LA County finally came through and offered her some sort of shelter. But that was 2 weeks later. And then we still have people who were, someone who had their tent burnt that morning, and so felt like they were under threat and couldn't come back. It's really upsetting, and I would say, I like people have said, everyone wants housing, everyone wants shelter, everyone wants safety, and everyone wants some sort of sense of security. And it's not that people wanted to be in that encampment because they love that encampment so much. I had someone tell me, like, I just need housing, I'm losing my mind out here. That happened on that day, that morning. And so it's very difficult to hear those things and to see how people are being shoved around. And we saw like people who had been on the Culver City side for years, who had been on the St. Joseph's Center is the agency that is contracted by Culver City and by Los Angeles. We saw someone's contract be switched from Culver City to LA. So people are being traded, their cases are being traded. And then we saw someone else who was a refugee from the Venice Boulevard sweep end up getting accepted into Culver City housing months and months later. So almost a year later, they're accepted in the program just because they've been on the streets for so long. And so I think in a lot of ways, we've reduced people to pieces, to pawns. We haven't prioritized really individuals' well-being. We've prioritized aesthetics to really appease a conservative-leaning, force in our city.
Thank you, Sebastien. I really appreciate you highlighting. Essentially, what we're seeing is a prioritizing of the comfort of some versus the safety and the life and death situations that some community members are facing. So for the quote unquote comfort of people not wanting to see litter or, wanting to beautify their community, we're seeing people's lives put at risk, well-being, their medication. And would love to hear from Mayor McMorrin and Councilmember Puza a bit more of how many people have actually been housed. And I want to ask you this question because one of the things Sebastien Ndindi mentioned is that, there's a list where people can potentially get housing. And Sebastien specifically mentioned that people are basically being traded off this list between county and city. And I think there's a complexity here among all of these jurisdictions and bureaucracies. So how many people have been housed in Culver City?
Thanks so much. I really appreciate, this is a really magical conversation for, I wish it was for better reasons, but I'm very grateful that we have all of these diverse perspectives at the table. So really grateful to be here and be a part of this. So one of the things as a part of our state of emergency update is that, I would always ask questions like, what's going on with the wait list? How many people are on the wait list? When is Home Key going to be open? How many people are there? When are folks going to be moving in? And some people, some people appreciate my questions. Some people wish I'd probably be quiet so we could get on with the meeting. But unfortunately, as of January, fortunately or unfortunately, as of January the 8th, we have 14 neighbors that are moved into our Home Key site. That might have been, they said there was going to be 4 or 6 more maybe in the coming week. But there's just been a lot of movement. And I do want to offer just a little bit of grace, because this is the first time that the city has really, we've never had a Housing and Human Services Department ever. This is our first home key project. I hope we will have more. I know we're learning a ton about a lot with this initiative. And at the safe camping or the safe sleeping site, that fluctuates, because those are tents that are permissible by the city. Those are tents that will not be removed by the anti-camping ordinance. But the tents are, I would say a little bit more temporary. I know some of those folks, I think, will be slated to move over to the home key site. There are folks who are in our motel leasing that are also identified to be able to move over, but it's all very fluid. There's not a lot of transparency as to when or why folks are able to move. I've heard from folks that some of the dates for moving have shifted as well. And I assume everyone is doing the best they can, but it is, I'm sure, all of this is incredibly stressful. Experiencing housing insecurity is incredibly stressful. Having your items taken from you, saying that it's care, it's not care. It is not care to be moving in this posture. It is the easiest thing that the city could do to appease, like I said, like we've been alluding to, this desire to have our city look and feel a certain way, which we all share, right? We want everyone to be housed. We want everyone to have their needs met. But there is a willingness to push folks into carceral systems where they will have a bed, where they will have the quality of that is, but it's like what we will pay for within a carceral construct is super wild. And we have folks who want support and to be treated fairly and with respect. Some of the rules that they have are not the rules that we have in our own homes. It's just it boggles the mind. I do want to just amplify, and I want to make sure to give Councilmember Puza an opportunity to address this question as well. But Brian Stevenson has this quote that I absolutely love. It's in a magnet on my fridge. It keeps me grounded. And it says, "The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned." And we're not doing a great job right now. And I always say it's never too late to recover. We can always make a different choice. But how we are treating folks who are absolutely struggling, right? And this could be any one of us. The data right now on how folks are doing financially in this country is pretty poor. Most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, which means we too can find ourselves in a situation where we happen to be in our cars or out on the street, which is happening more and more to our seniors. It is happening, right? So I implore our neighbors to have a bit more empathy and see yourselves in our neighbors. And is this how you want to be treated? Would you want for your items to be thrown away like this? Would you want to be receiving more care and compassion? So I'll stop there and pass it over to Councilmember Puza.
Yes, and Councilmember Puza, before you start, feel free to answer that question, but I want to do a quick round, to close this out. I would love to hear from you one thing that is moving in the right direction, and one way in which the community listening today can help.
Great.
And
Yeah.
Same question for everyone, by the way. We'll go to Ndindi next. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. And Mayor McMorrin, thank you for those comments, and then also getting the numbers. The one thing that I wanted to add is that one of the reasons that the justifications for the anti-camping ordinance was that because LA, has 4118, that once they implemented that the unhoused would just pour into Culver City. That didn't happen. So it's just thinking about how fear is used in a lot of this, and so that's just something that I think about a lot. Also, just Mayor McMorrin also talked about the emergency ordinance and how we get the reports at every meeting. At the direction of the suggestion of the city manager, within that ordinance, it says that it can be up to 60 days that those reports can be made. And so the council majority listened to that suggestion. That's, within their purview. But I think that, this is the beginning of the crisis. And so the point I was trying to make is that, we're in phase one of many, many, many phases. So we should be continuing to get these, reports. And so one of the things that we could be getting reports on is just the numbers. Also, we can, I suggested to get a report on how many times the anti-camping ordinance is being implemented. That's important to understand how this is being used. Another thing is that the Housing and Homelessness Committee was dissolved. Now, to be fair, that was part of the general plan process. So, but we could have, transformed that into, a new way. So, also to be fair, it doesn't mean just because we moved it to 60 days, it doesn't mean that the staff can't report every meeting. So I want to be fair on that as well. Something that I think that is going really well is the Mobile Crisis Intervention Unit. I'm just so happy about that. I think that just creating alternative responses to these issues is so important right now. The police are, they have a specific mission to solve crimes. And right now the city puts so much on them that they're just simply not trained to do. And it causes a lot of harm to a lot of people dealing with mental health issues, domestic violence. There's so many other issues that they're just not able to do. And they have a specific mission, and I want them to be able to do their jobs in the way that they can. And the Mobile Crisis Intervention Unit is going to be able to provide that service for our city and be able to really, I'm just excited to see the results of that. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll go over to Ndindi. Would love to hear, what do you think Culver City is doing correctly and moving in the right direction? And second question is, what can the community do to help?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a great question to wrap up with. Quite excited about the Mobile Crisis Unit and want to see what that looks like, especially for unhoused folks who actually have been wanting and needing the services. So yeah, we're excited to see what that looks like in 2024. I think something else that sometimes is overlooked is one collective protective factor that we all have together as community and people who are not interested in criminalizing or harming their unhoused neighbors, who are really interested in solutions. And so over the past 4 years, I've certainly met everyone who's in this group right now, met all sorts of other people in Culver City working on so many other issues. And so the fact that young people, seniors, all sorts of people across Culver City are invested in this question, and that the government is not the people, is, I think, something that we can't easily forget, that we actually do have each other, and we have possibilities of doing better collectively. Yeah, and I think when it comes to what could be done better is real meaningful communication and engagement with unhoused people. I know like a forum like this should really include people who are experiencing houselessness, and I think we should all find ways to really address those barriers in a way that goes beyond, show up at city council and say your piece, or try and navigate a website that's not flexible, or call a number until you're desperate, and then eventually when you do get your say, because you're really upset about it, because of some interesting civility politics, it makes it seem that the person who's vulnerable and struggling and suffering is the one who's just out of control. But in the meanwhile, they've been kind of violated in so many ways. So I think there are so many humanizing and beautiful ways we can really get together in community and really solve. Like, I learn all sorts of creative things from my neighbors who live outdoors, and they have so many insights that we're not even tapping into, and they do want to participate, and they are they are constituents, and I think that needs to be understood by all of the departments that are involved. I did want to uplift, because I did talk to a couple of people before I got on here. The weather's not great, and there is no shelter option. On Culver City website right now, there is a flyer. It lets you know that you are free to call 211. During our last situation with the hurricane, we had people waiting 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, and the wait didn't yield anything. So I think that's an area to really work on, as we're going to keep facing all the issues that have to do with climate breakdown, and the people who bear the brunt of that are people who are unsheltered and who live outdoors. I mean, climate catastrophe is coming for us all, but that really is who is facing that at the most right now. And then the other thing folks asked me to bring up is the question of storage. There are people who have items they want to store, and not knowing what's going to go on with that is actually a barrier to joining a program, if it's available to them or what have you. So I would say that that's important. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Sebastien, if you can round us out with, what do you think the city is doing well, and what can the community do to help?
Well, I'll say that it's the best as I can tell from the people who are in the city programs, it's working well for them. So for the people who are in it, it does seem to be a decent pilot program, but I would say it does need to be expanded. I think, there's always going to be issues with providers, and making sure that the people employed by service providers who are contracted by the city are consistent and well trained, and not combative with the people that they're servicing, and to see people as clients rather than demanding randos, I guess. So yeah, just so that the people are continuing to be seen as people to serve, and not people to be shuttled around and to be shut up, to be quieted. I would say what can the community can do and what we can do better. I think if the community would, as I said earlier, start thinking about the well-being of people on the street, as opposed to looking at the aesthetics of what's happening on the outside. I think, as people have been saying, the mobile crisis team is an incredibly positive thing. I'm glad to see it's out there. I wish it was run by someone else, because someone who wasn't under such strange misconceptions about what causes homelessness and what are the conditions of it and the mind state of people who are in it, alluding to the fact that maybe they'd rather spend $3,000 a month on crystal meth as opposed to paying rent in Culver City. There's some wildly far-fetched things that I feel like a lot of that are actually really entrenched, and I think maybe his views are just indicative of a general thrust. So I think education is one thing. Just some basic Googling would be great. But I think also separating along these lines, separating what is a mental health crisis and what is a housing crisis. I think solving the housing crisis would do so much, advocating for affordable housing, not opposing affordable housing in your neighborhood, being open to that, and not just open to that, actually proactively advocating for that, I think will go such a long way. And then when we find after that, I think would be that the people who I think draw the most attention on the street would be able to get the services that they need.
Thank you. And Mayor McMorrin, you had one last closing thought.
Yes, and y'all know I'm chatty. I apologize. But one thing I want to say in terms of our opportunity for Culver City, and this is something we applied to, I think, in 2021, but unfortunately didn't receive the state grant. But a wonderful opportunity is universal basic income. There was a study that just came out, I think, at the top of this year, or maybe in December, about a pilot that took place in Los Angeles. And I think the amount was somewhere between $500, maybe $750, maybe $1,000 a month. And it was specifically for folks who are experiencing homelessness. And at the end of the 6 month to 1 year pilot, I believe like 90% of the folks who participated in the program were able on their own, to not be living outdoors anymore, right? And this is a solution that is not paternalistic, which our solutions tend to be very strict and have a lot of rules. So this was a really cool experiment and pilot that I think gives us a new opportunity to kind of look at something that we're not doing, because sweeps are really expensive, y'all. They're really not sustainable. People always come back because we're not building the housing that folks really need. So it's just something I wanted to toss out just to pay attention to in terms of it being a really proven approach to supporting folks who, we all just need a little support. So I'll pass it back over to you, Nancy. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us in this really amazing conversation. And yes, it's important that we continue to work to make this better. And I want to say by one of the topics, more people die of hypothermia in Los Angeles than they do in New York and San Francisco combined, based on a report by LA Times from 2019. All of this, the housing issue, as Ndindi alluded, climate change impacts are being felt today, and things will get worse before they get better, which is why this conversation is so critical. We need to think critically how we're going to help each other, how we are going to take care of our neighbors and our brothers and sisters, and we need to think how we show up as humans. So with all of that, thank you so much for joining. Please sign up for Mayor McMorrin and Councilmember Puza's newsletters. PUMA is a great organization. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.